welcome back to Future Proof Mzansi, a podcast where we discuss how consumer behavior shapes our marketing plans. I'm Stacy.
And I'm Senna. We're colleagues at Kantar and your hosts. On this podcast, we interview the most creative minds and innovative thinkers about the many impactful brands in the country and why people love them.
We discuss what makes South Africans tick, why they do the things they do, and what those things are.
Most importantly, through our discussions, we offer practical advice for how to build the brands of tomorrow.
Oh, I'm so excited to be back. It's been 1 or 2 episodes since I've been here. And today we are chatting about a subject that is really close to both Senna and my hearts, and that is diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's off the recent release of Kantar's Brand Inclusion Index, which is a first of its kind report which focuses on the consumer perception of brand inclusivity across 18 markets. And we're excited to say that includes South Africa.
Passionate about it indeed, Stacy, with 75% of South African respondents saying that they have experienced discrimination and 94% saying that DI is important to them. Being a truly inclusive brand really is a non-negotiable. And this research is a great tool for brands who know they have to take a stand and support diversity and inclusion, but aren't really sure where to begin. The Brand Inclusion Index report exists to offer guidance and inspiration to brands to show up as authentically and as inclusive as possible.
So today we want to dig a little bit deeper on the topic. Firstly, we want to speak to a Kantar expert for advice on what brands should be doing, especially those brands who are concerned about negative repercussion, which is something that we've heard brands tend to be a little bit concerned about. Although we must admit that our research shows that the opportunities far outweigh the risks. So we've also invited a representative from a brand that is truly committed to promoting inclusion and continues to take a stand, even when faced with backlash.
Stacy, again, I can't reiterate how excited I am for this one because there really is so much to unpack. So let's get right into it. Our first guest is a senior consultant at Kantar, specializing in human-centric growth strategies delivered through inclusion and empathy. He focuses on positioning, futures, innovation, sustainability, and has worked on key brand growth programs across categories and markets. Welcome, Amit Nanoo.
Hello. Confession time. This is my first time on a podcast, so be gentle or rough. Here we go. My pronouns are he, him, but I truly identify as a wealthy person. Nobody tell my bank account. Jokes aside, this is one of my favorite topics to discuss with some of my favorite people, so I can't wait to get stuck into it.
Oh, I feel like I'm surrounded by all my favorite people. And joining Amit in studio today is Zinzi Mgolodela, which is the Director of Social Corporate Justice at Woolworths, South Africa. And like the other 3 people in this room, she is equally passionate about matters of social justice and leads the Inclusive Justice Initiative at Woolworths, which is aimed at inspiring inclusive growth for all. Welcome, Zinzi.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Really happy to be here.
Right, let's get into it. We always start with, just asking our guests to tell us a little bit more about themselves. So, Amit, could you tell us a little bit more about your career history and the route to specializing in inclusivity and sustainability at Kantar?
I've had an unconventional journey into the world of consulting. I started out as an architect, and during the great sort of resignation during COVID, I decided to pivot into consulting, which really opened my world up into strategy, innovation. I also went through a phase where I said yes to absolutely every opportunity, and this led me to spearheading the Diva Kantar LGBTQ plus report, which became one of the largest studies of its kind, and then finally being included in the Brand Inclusion Index. And I know we mentioned the word expert, but when it comes to specializing in inclusion, because of its ever evolving nature, I like to think of myself as a partner to anyone in trying to figure it all out.
Thank you, Amit. And Zinzi, can you tell us a bit about your journey and how you came to be Director of Corporate Social Justice for one of South Africa's most respected brands?
Thank you, Stacy. Really a long journey. One that got me, I think, started off with being passionate about brands. I remember in my university times, I think I was very clear I'm going into marketing. But I think the time I went to university really taught me a lot about South Africa and the South African context that started shaping my career into social issues. But with a business degree, I was able to land in business with the social voice. So I've done everything from corporate social investment to HIV/AIDS in the insurance industry to sponsorship, but really biased sponsorship towards social issues, to triple BE, Black Economic Empowerment, really putting myself out there as one of the, acknowledged practitioners in the space of transformation and understanding what corporate can do with that. So where I find myself now is really deepening the S of ESG in corporate through corporate social justice. What a privilege, to be able to do this, particularly with a brand like Woolworths, who really lives its purpose, its vision, and values.
Zinzi, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And I guess I mean, it sounds as though we are all, really passionate about inclusivity and social justice. And I think that's a great place for us all to start the conversation, which really did start with a report that Kantar released and which Amit was part of putting together. So Amit, could you tell us a little bit about that report, how it was carried out, some of the main themes? And I do just want to ask if perhaps you could set the scene by giving us a picture of the difference, perhaps you could say difference, around diversity and inclusion.
Lovely. Thank you, Stacy. Let's start with what the report is. So firstly, the Brand Inclusion Index shows how brands can close their inclusion gaps, essentially. The BII focuses on different people's perceptions of a brand's diversity, equity, and inclusion. What people really feel, think, see, and how they consider the brand as a result. It also gives a voice to those people who tend to be excluded by brands. And to elevate inclusion, what we've done is we've overrepresented these underrepresented groups, right? Focusing on underrepresented or misrepresented populations. Before we dive into the findings of the report, let's explore what inclusion and diversity really mean. And I know South Africans love a good party, so let's use that metaphor to explain this. And I want you to imagine standing outside watching the most fabulous party through a window. Well, that's exclusion, right? Getting an invitation to join the party, well, that's diversity. Being asked to plan the party, that's inclusion. And just for our specific context, I'd like to add another layer to this, quite a well known metaphor. And that is imagine not knowing the party's happening at all. And that would ultimately describe what systemic exclusion is, what South Africans are faced with every day. And when it comes out to some of the findings or the big findings from the report, deep diving into South Africa in particular, there were two main themes that emerge. And that was that inclusion is directly linked to two motivational areas in people's lives: the quest for belonging, and this is no surprise when it comes to inclusion, and the quest for progress, which is also not a surprise considering that we are living in one of the world's most unequal countries. Regarding belonging, people want to see themselves authentically represented by brands. They want their needs met through inclusive innovation. And finally, they want to feel connected to brands and to one another. The best example of this that I can think of is what Rugby SA did with their Stronger Together mantra, which essentially connected a nation with a super powerful idea that transcended demographics, right? And we can get into the debate a bit later on about representation versus inclusion, because I think there's important nuances there. But just top of mind, Rugby SA, beautiful job. Double clicking into the desire for progress, and this is a fascinating one when it comes to inclusion, right? Because one could argue that access is foundational to inclusion in a market like ours. And when we talk about access, it's access that is physical, it's mental, it's emotional, and economic. And once we have this access, once we've been granted access, we want to be treated fairly. And this speaks directly to how your brand experience. And this is not just communication. This is through all the touch points. We hear so often, the person behind the counter didn't smile at me. This could be a version of inclusion or exclusion, right? And then finally, this was the most surprising and sort of the most powerful point for brands to take away, is that people want brands to take a stand for equality in our country.
Now, you spoke about this being, essay. These were the main insights coming sort of out of essay, but it also highlighted something in the Africa report. And I think it was Africa's sheer buying power, positioning that as an advantage, especially compared with developed markets who are slowing down. Could you unpack this opportunity for us a bit and what that means for brands?
What we see globally is that marginalized communities with significant buying power are the ones who are usually excluded by brands. So here we're talking about LGBTQ plus communities, differently abled people, those sorts of groups of people who are traditionally underserved by brands globally. But for Africa, and in South Africa, it's the majority of people who are excluded. Because we live in such a deeply economically divided country, the sort of the groups that are marginalized are those that do not have the means, and brands do not serve them. And now to answer your initial question about buying power, and I'm going to frame this through the opportunity. We know that Africa and South Africa is one of the youngest continents and countries, and they have very specific demands of businesses and brands. Young people expect businesses and brands to make society fairer, and the report makes that explicitly clear. So it's as simple as this, and we have many clients coming to us with this question: how do we connect to Gen Z? Well, this is how you make society fairer.
Oh, I love that. That's like a tagline, Amit, making society fairer. Amit, thank you. And as you would know, since we co-wrote the report together, but Nike was voted the number one brand or the number one inclusive brand in South Africa by South African respondents. And we know that to be a product of the amazing work they do globally. But I want to take this to South Africa now. And we have a local brand here that is doing incredible work in this space, which is why we are so thrilled to have Zinzi here with us today from Woolworths. Zinzi, what internal or business DEI initiatives does Woolworths have in place, and how are those being perceived amongst South Africans?
We know one thing: we cannot sit and watch. We know that we live in a world of, as Amit has said, a world where there's marginalization, discrimination, inequality, and we think as a brand we can make our own contribution in the spheres of influence that we have as a business. We know for a fact that if we do that and we do it authentically, the customers, the stakeholders of this brand would feel it, will feel the connection to Amit's point, but they will feel the belonging, they will have the emotional connection with the brand. We want as much as possible to be relevant. I think relevance as a brand takes us to the space of social justice, where we are conscious about the impact we can have or not have in the world, in society, and how we contribute as we participate in the different value chains that we participate in as a brand, in particularly making sure that everybody feels like they belong, whether it's a supplier, whether it's an employee, whether it's a customer, whether it's just general society. We're quite conscious about that.
Yeah, all about belonging, and I do love the word that you use there frequently, which is authenticity. So Zinzi, what are some of the campaigns that you've delivered over the years that have helped to position you as an inclusive brand?
We do have campaigns, Stacy, but I do want to point out that we're really building this in our business as a way that we disrupt our thinking and our perspective on how we do things on a daily basis. So it's in our processes where we know, because of the construct of business, that we could be excluding somebody. It's in our policies. But as a brand, it's also how we show up. How do we start our tonality and how do we start, showing up in a way that people feel more included, particularly the marginalized. So we've had a few campaigns, targeting specifically, marginalized groups and creating a sense that we see them. And we've burnt our fingers along the way as well, where we make mistakes and we learn along the way as well. So just to mention a few, we've done things around, LGBTQIA plus, and we've learned there, good lessons in terms of how best to tackle something that can be really, really sensitive. We've looked at the inclusivity in the South African space in terms of our product offering, whether it's different cultures, and just the national identity. We've had internal, campaigns, for example, around, not really campaign, but activations, I think is a better word for me, with people living with disability. We've had women. We are a signatory with the UN Women Empowerment Principles. Again, what I love about that is that it challenges us to look at this systemically, not just campaigns. Again, our strategies, how we implement, how we measure and what we measure, how we report, but also it looks at how we advocate, for these things.
Yeah, that's lovely. I appreciate how, a campaign speaks to a moment in time, but that's not at all what it sounds like you are about. This is the ecosystem. This is a brand who has at its heart inclusion, and how does that then play out in every aspect that we touch? So very much appreciate that.
And Zinzi, you touched on your answer there. You touched on sort of at times it's not been easy. You've had to learn some very difficult lessons. How does Woolworths weigh up the risk versus the opportunities when considering diversity and inclusion in your marketing?
There's more opportunities than risk, and maybe even the risk become opportunities. In that it's when we as society are having difficult conversations and coming together and muscling it out that we're going to find each other. I think we need to have these difficult conversations. We need to create discomfort to shift forward, and we've decided to be that brand as Woolies, where um, with reason, how do we disrupt and create the discomfort that is necessary? But engagement and communication solves the sensitivity aspects of it. We're finding ourselves engaging the voices, and all sides voices, because inclusion can't exclude. You can't do exclusionary things in the context of inclusion. So we want to make sure that even people who feel they're excluded by some of the things we do as Woolies understand that at the end of the day, it's about humanity. I doubt anyone can dispute that. So, social justice and our inclusive justice initiative is about centering us all on humanity and embracing each other for who we are, our identities, the difference, the diversity that we present, and leveraging on it. I honestly feel there's so much for business in leveraging diversity and embracing social justice, where everybody start to gravitate to a feeling of belonging. But it does start with that messy work, Stacy and Sina. You need to kind of be prepared to go into that messiness and burn fingers and engage and cross correct and learn and be vulnerable. I think that was one of the things we were clear about as a brand that obsesses on quality. This is one part of what we do that we knew that we are making ourselves super vulnerable because we don't have all the answers. So it requires that we don't think our voice is the only voice as a business. We realize that we can always get the voices we need to give meaning to the things we want to do and make sure that they are relevant, accepted, and create a sense of belonging and inclusion that we want to achieve.
Yeah, thank you. And you know what, Zinzi, it's such a thing. So you talk about the fact that there is so much opportunity here, and in fact, we conducted a poll, and we asked the audience, who were all brand marketers, we asked them what the biggest barrier was for brands taking a strong stand on social issues, and the over 50% of the marketers on that call said it was because they were scared of the backlash. So, because I love how you said that actually backlash is opportunity, it helps us develop language and nuance and become more inclusive. So, I recall last year, I think when you launched the Pride campaign, I saw a lot of backlash, and I would love to know how you managed that and what some of the learnings were there.
Stacy, you won't believe if I tell you that every email, every phone call was answered last year. Everybody was unhappy with Woolies, got to engage with Woolies. We learned so much. We had meetings with interest groups. We had meetings with religious groups to understand what was about our campaign that didn't work, and we took learnings from it. I'll use an example. One of the things we did, we wrote letters to everyone to call them to be an ally, and they felt it was invasive. The following year, we did it differently. Same campaign. We're not backing on what we stand for and our on our position on social justice, but it's sometimes how you do it. The point I made earlier about we can't find ourselves excluding in the name of inclusion. So we don't want to exclude anyone, but let's find shared humanity. So in those engagements, our going position was the fact that we're doing the right thing. It's maybe we might not doing it the right way. And also, how do we find each other? How do we find shared humanity in the differences, that we sit with? But when we took up the commitment and publicly announced that Woolies is committed to inclusive justice, we knew that there's no coming back from that. And our vision to be one of the most responsible retailers calls us to do this work. Furthermore, the fact that we committed as back as 2007 on our good business journey, meaning we do good as we do business, meant we take environmental injustice and social injustice and climate injustice seriously as a business.
Yeah, a very commendable way of baking inclusion and into the actual brand and who you are, rather than, as we spoke earlier, rather than this looking like a campaign. And that's what makes it authentic, isn't it? Amit,
Yeah.
I mentioned that many brand marketers are very scared of this backlash. And I mean, I've had sidebar conversation with marketers who say, I want to do all this stuff, but man, I'm terrified. So actually, I think I'm going to wait and see what others are up to before I enter the space. So what advice can you give brands that are considering creating inclusive strategies and campaigns to ensure that they respond appropriately and stand behind their campaign, or at least should I say, stand behind their brand purpose against or in the face of any negative reactions?
Let's take a step back, right? And if we do that, we can understand what society is asking of us. And when we ask certain questions like, what is keeping us from being truly inclusive? And then my next question would be, what would a, an inclusive world look like, right? Is it the Rainbow Nation? And my point here is that I think we don't have that inspiring vision or journey to look forward to as a nation. We actually don't know what it looks like. We speak about it. We speak about it in terms, but everything to do in sustainability. Actually, we know these things. We know kind of what these things are, but we don't know what it actually means and what it actually looks like. And this is what's so fascinating listening to Zinzi, because I don't think the Pride campaign in the store is actually inclusion. I think that is the product of inclusion and an inclusive business, which is more powerful, right? The people that you have in the business, being part of the Rainbow Crew, I was. It's always great to see be an ally on a t-shirt, but I was really looking to your response to the backlash to see, okay, do they really believe what they're saying, or is this a ploy to get me to buy more of their products? And when you tell the story that way, Zinzi, in the fact that so much care and so much effort went into getting it right and managing all the different stakeholders, managing the backlash, not just shunning them, that is the discussions, like you said, that we are looking to have as a society. That is what we need, the blueprint almost to understand how can we be more inclusive. And brands are sort of the most powerful when they create and influence culture, right? That's when they at their sort of most powerful. And if they choose to turn that power to create a vision of what inclusion could really look like and be like in society, that could be amazing. And when you offer up a vision of what something could be, um, and you stand firm for that, the backlash then becomes easier to deal with, right? And I'll cite this example from last year, actually. I think it must be one of the biggest marketing blunders out there, the Bud Light and Dylan Mulvaney sponsorship, which completely tanked that brand. And objectively, that was for a number of reasons was not the right time, not the right target audience, it was not right. And that we could see the audience and people could clearly see through that was inclusion for a sort of an economic driven, profit driven background. Nike, what often doesn't get shown was that Nike sponsored Dylan Mulvaney with their new sportswear line, and they faced a similar sort of backlash with people across America burning Nike sportswear, burning the shoes, burning the apparel, all of it. Nike came out on Twitter and said, "You can do you, but if this is what we believe in an inclusive world, and if you are not aligned to that, you're free to live your life." So two very sort of different approaches to backlash when it comes to the way the two brands handle that, because Bud Light essentially pulled the whole campaign and said it was a mistake and it should never have happened, and up till now hasn't really made amends on actually both sides. So they lost the transgender side and the LGBTQ side and their sort of target audience. And then just one more example I like to cite. I don't know if this brand knew what they were doing at the time, but Vodacom, right, in 1994 with their Yebo Gogo adverts. I think if we cast our minds back to the tension that the nation was in at that moment, we were still learning, and I think we are still learning to live cohesively. But I think what those pieces of communication gave us the tools that, oh, maybe narratives can be rescripted, right? If we think about what those showed, it was the sort of white man who always got in trouble, slightly satirical, funny, lighthearted, and a black man with the cell phone would come to his be the savior in those situations. Those were deeply sort of meaningful narratives, right? And what we see now, 30 years later, is Vodacom's actually returned back to that heartland of inclusion. If you look at their latest campaign, which boldly celebrates inclusion and what that looks like in terms of all walks of life.
Amit, you once said that there's a difference between taking a stand against something versus taking up for a cause. How does having a clear purpose help in making a stand for brands? And to take it a step further, what is the risk of being inclusive purely for marketing purposes and not because of alignment with the brand's values and business strategy?
So taking a stand versus standing up for a cause, taking a stand against something. We've seen numerous sort of geopolitical wars taking place, and people are asking the hard questions about where you stand in that particular issue, right? Versus standing for something or standing up for a cause, which is what we were speaking about earlier, about painting that alternate vision for people to follow. So both of them are equally important. Both of them are ways in which brands can express their viewpoint on sustainability. Great example here, Patagonia, right? One of their famous sort of lines or adverts is an advert that advocates for people not to buy their product. And this is about shifting that narrative around fashion and consumerism. And what I'm really getting to here is so many times in this world of sustainability and inclusion, we see, oh, we anti this, or we against this. But what does that really mean? And then to, I think, the third prong of that question about purpose, right? When we make purpose the beating heart of our brand, and when I say that, I actually mean the people behind the brand. Because if it doesn't beat within Zinzi, then there's no amount of strategy on a document that is going to suddenly inspire people to be more inclusive, right? Zinzi, you spoke about it. It's about having the right people in the rooms about the discussion. So when your purpose is strong and when it serves people in an authentic way, because purpose in its essence is, why does my business and brand exist beyond making a profit? Then it makes everything we do easier, because it's the guiding sort of heartbeat that pulsates through all of our actions.
Zinzi, I want to ask you a question. So we had a chat about this interview, and one of the questions we had is that Woolworths in itself, Woolworths is the difference, right? It is a premium brand. It is a brand that our country collectively aspire to have in their home. And so how do you manage economic inclusivity, considering that we're marketed in this way, or that we show up in this way? And are there ways that you make it accessible for less affluent consumers so that they are still a part of the Woolworths experience?
I think we are an aspirational brand. Yes, we, like any other brand, you peg yourself at a particular, target market. But in this context of inclusive justice, access is everything for us. We realize as Woolies that we cannot be aspirational and not be accessible. We want to offer the best value, because for us, it's not being expensive, it's actually value. We want to offer a product that is appreciated by a customer, to have considered both social and environmental justice. So that what goes with that is a lot of education. And I think people make choices from that perspective, in terms of brand association, where they spend their last rand, and why do they spend it there, and what outcomes and impact that particular brand has. So for me, it's about accessibility more than anything. It's about aspiration beyond just the quality, but in the intrinsic, things that you find in our product and in who we are. And just the pride that comes with the customer pushing a Woolies trolley and knowing they're part of that value system, that really contributes to society. I won't mention names, but we've got cheap brands, or reasonably accessible brands from a price point of view. But slowly people are pulling out of those brands because they fill landfills, cheap labor, children, and people don't want to be associated with that. And slowly, I think there's going to be understanding of what is value versus price. So, one of the things we do as part of inclusive justice is a whole stream of economic inclusion, whether it's our just wage initiative with our, staff, employees, particularly entry level employees. We've internalized for ourselves that a minimum wage is not a living wage, and a living wage is not a just wage. So that's important. So there's going to be understanding of that value. We've looked at other economic inclusion aspects around how we build SMMEs and support SMMEs in our value chain. Woolies has done what is referenced in Triple B as enterprise development for years, where we grow, small businesses from from a garage factory to a fully fledged, world class factory. So that also is part of the value that the customer is buying into. Recently, we launched, as part of our Inclusive Justice Initiative, Youth Makers Program, WOW, where we invited youth into a competition to come and showcase their products as youth makers, where they learn how to interact with a big brand. And all of them were not at a point where they can supply Woolies, but we knew that. But what we wanted to give them is skill and mentorship, and giving them a sense of what it could look like, and giving them a platform, but doing it with dignity, and not just, I'm doing you a favor. How do we make it feel like they are more important than Woolies in this, because it's about them, not Woolies?
Because there are so many levels of accessibility, and you're addressing them all. It's what we at Kantar would call a justified premium. So perhaps there is a premium to accessing the service, but it is doing so much to justify why it is worth investing behind. So thank you.
So, Amit, circling back to you, one of the most interesting things that came out of sort of the BII coming out of the African markets was it debunked this myth that diversity and inclusion are almost like altruistic pursuits or, quote, first world problems. But now we see that inclusion is no longer just an ethical but a commercial case as well. Could you explain to our listeners why this is the case?
We know that Africans deeply care about societal matters, because that is what is closer to them. But also, I want to also challenge us, because I feel like that narrative is getting a bit old now. What we are increasingly seeing is that there is a realization of the inextricable link that societal and environmental sort of concerns have on each other. And this notion of those two being separated is also something that we need to overcome, especially for a market like ours, because we know that the people without means, those entry level consumers, they don't have the means to mitigate against both social and environmental disasters. And then just on the commercial aspect, when we think about it, and when we boil down the essence of inclusion, it's about human beings, right? It's about meeting their needs. It's about representing them respectfully. It's about making them feel like they belong, as Zinzi said. Brands and businesses over time have prioritized their products over people, and that's why we see this disconnection from what people truly need, right? And I know that's a bit harsh, but the solution's simple: fall in love with people again, understand them, have that deep empathy for them, serve them, and offer them the vision of the society that they want to live in. And through that, we'll find growth. Why? And if we look at certain categories and brands that have done this, let's take whiskey, for example, right? Traditionally marketed to the successful man. Imagine taking your potential target audience and dividing it by half just because one's a man and the other one's a woman.
Because there is commercial opportunity in including everyone as your target market. I would completely agree. Thank you, Amit. Thank you, Zinzi. It was such a wonderful chat. And thank you to our listeners. You can find Future Proof Mzansi on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Please subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Thank you to our guests, and thank you to our listeners.